Right now, I've got the opportunity to do a fireside chat with Derek Gebler and Susan Bell from TownNews. I'm Eric Schumacher-Rasmussen. I'm the editor of streamingmedia.com and conference chair. You've seen me around the last couple of days. I apologize for the fact that we don't really have the classic fireside chat comfy chairs here, nor do we actually have a fire. Has anyone actually been to a fireside chat that had a fire? It's my one goal in life. That's all I want. But we're going to try to make it as casual as possible. And I'm going to sit down here with Derek and Susan. So before we start, can tell us a little bit about yourselves and TownNews.
Sure. So I'm the Vice President of Broadcast and Video. I came to TownNews about a year ago. I had been running and started my own video software company that was for online digital video. And TownNews is a complete suite of digital products for broadcasters, newspapers. We're doing magazines, radio, basically any type of media company. And we offer all different types of elements for either hosting their website or doing their OTT product or apps or video. We kind of do it all. And Susan is, I'll let Susan talk next.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. I'm Susan Bell. I'm the Senior Product Manager for our OTT product line and our mobile app product line. Started working on those lines about 5-6 years ago with a company called Calkins Media. And TownNews acquired that technology, and we have carried it on with more resources. Back behind that, before that, I worked in broadcast media for 23 years. And so it's a passion of mine to see local media succeed on these OTT platforms, and it's been an interesting journey so far.
Excellent. Well, the title of the talk today is Transforming Broadcast News for the Digital Age, Lessons Learned from an OTT Pioneer. And let's start right there with sort of a fundamental question about what makes for great OTT content. You talk about taking broadcast news, local news, and making it compelling in an OTT offering. How is great OTT content different from great broadcast content, for instance?
Well, and I'll start, and Derek
Yeah.
can piggyback off of this, but one thing that we have to be careful of is, people do come to local media for that news and weather experience, and so we definitely want to provide that on all of our platforms. I think the regurgitation of information everywhere and not changing it up and making it specific is kind of a danger zone people get in. I think that we have to provide unique OTT experiences with our content. We are competing with programming. It is on these big screens where there's a Netflix app and a Hulu app. So what are we providing for the user and for their consumption outside of what we're already doing on broadcast?
So what we try to talk about when we're talking to local broadcasters is how can they find some sort of niche and offer that up and highlight that and make that their thing. And so with local media, often it's sports. Mm-hmm. They have access to some sort of sport team or sporting event or whatever have you, and that's the thing that can drive a section of their app, or in some cases we've built entire apps around just sports.
Okay.
And that seems to be a driver of traffic for them.
So that's the type of content and how it can be successful, but what have you learned about the presentation of that content and the organization of that content on OT devices? Any suggestions for sort of best practices in terms of design and how you're presenting that content?
Sure, and this is kind of one of those lessons learned category. Things, we've been around for a little bit producing content for OTT, so I think that we forget sometimes as developers that people are engaging with these products with remote controls, right? Mm-hmm. They're clunky, or voice activation. It's clunky, the information's hard to get to. So, where it's, kind of a hybrid digital model, we have to make sure that it presents itself like TV. So one click before you get to content. I think we're so concerned with navigation sometimes that we put too much navigation in the OTT apps when really we just want that content. We want to be able to find it right away. So I would just caution anybody against putting too much navigation. Just show us the content, let us get there with one click. You know, the Netflix and Hulu experiences are what people expect.
Mhm.
Right, so we're trying to not over-engineer our apps.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's been, we all can think of some apps that are difficult to get into and you don't know how to get out of.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking to local media and our customers, you know, we're trying to figure out how do we get at that video faster? Because it's not like, it's weird because it feels like the early days of websites, right?
Mhm.
Where anything goes, and it is still.
Right.
But it's maturing now, and there is kind of a form and a function, and we've all been trained on Netflix.
Mhm.
Netflix for local media is not it doesn't exactly apply, so you kind of have to rethink it for local media. There's a different, well, it's advertising supported, first of all.
Mhm.
And then second of all, there's a lot of, it's not episodic content
Mhm.
in most cases, and it has live content too.
Right, right. I mean, I recall when Hulu, who have, for the most part, done a great job, when they did their big redesign a couple of years ago, you know, my first reaction was, yeah, but I still want the EPG. I still want the, you know,
Right.
it's a fine line to walk and a tough balance to achieve, having a compelling user interface that works on a design and sort of a theoretical basis, and just having, you know, the straightforward, this is what's on now and this is what'll be on next.
Right.
But I think you have to have trust in the design, right?
Right.
You have to trust that they are showing you what you want to see.
Mhm.
So, you know, with local media specifically, and we'll talk about this later as well, but, you know, breaking news, breaking weather, when I turn on, I don't want to have to go find that stuff. I have to trust the design enough to know when I turn the platform on,
Mhm.
it will show me what I want to see. If it's a Friday night and it's high school football and I've promised the users that it's going to be there, it needs to be prominent, it needs to be
Right.
right away, right? So I think it is kind of a trust too, and we can do that with design.
Right, right. Now, what about measurement? This morning, Melissa from Cheddar, you know, said straight out that measurement, audience measurement, is still not where we want it to be, where we kind of expected it would be, where we even think it should be, right? It seems like it should be so, I won't say it should be easy, but, and of course, it's a moving target, but what measurements are the most important for OTT, and how do you know it's working?
Well, I kind of want to answer that question two ways. So, you know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we started measuring OTT, you know, success metrics are one of them, but they didn't exist. The data didn't exist. So we actually built a dashboard so we can go and measure a lot of custom events, you know, kind of why Google caught up with the measurement. And, you know, now we're able to see how many people are watching. You kind of get those common measurements that we're all used to from Google Analytics as they kind of mature their platform. As we kind of see them pushing everybody into Firebase now, we'll see those analytics change. But, you know, overall metrics, now that we get the data, you know, it's a lot of data, so what do you look at? You know, are we looking at the downloads? Are we looking at the usage? You know, so I think we have to be careful of what we're looking at. We've learned that time spent is a really great OTT user story. It's very different from a mobile device where it's for the short attention span. People dive in, they watch 15 seconds of something. What our data supports is that when you dive onto a local media app, people are spending an hour with the content. That's a really great user story to tell your advertisers, is that means much more to them than giving them a download number that has inactive users in it that don't matter. So we're trying to chase the stories and educate the advertisers. And I think those are, and you want to talk a little bit about revenue?
As far as like other types of usage, and you know, we do want to be successful in tracking revenue, but and that's what it's going to all come down to.
Right.
Is can you actually come up with the ROI on what you've invested in your app? And you know, often it starts before you've even built the app. So have you pulled out the spreadsheet? Have you figured out what your bandwidth costs are? Can you do that? And once you actually know that you can pay for what you're producing, that's the best metric right there. And then if you can get over that, then that's where it gets really interesting.
Right. When clients or potential clients come to you, what are some of the biggest misconceptions they have about launching a new OTT service? And what do people overlook or not necessarily consider that for you, you've learned is central?
I'd say that it's building audience first. So you have to build awareness of your app. Once you get it out there, you have to build up that audience. That it's not going to be an immediate. It takes some time to build up who's downloading it, discoverability. Those are some of the things that are right off the bat. I'm not sure if you wanna.
Yeah, resources, I think, is a huge misconception. We all appreciate workflows in local media environments and understand, it takes a lot of people just to produce their legacy product. Digital's always been this thing and still pretty much has the same kind of barrier. Is this extra thing we still have to do.
Right.
We saw this on mobile app adoption, and how did our revenue work there? So, we have to devote resources. Can't just sign a license with a contract or with a vendor and expect there to be magic money,
Right.
that it does take time, it takes effort, it takes staff, it takes somebody thinking about it. So I would say resources is a huge misconception. Another thing I wanted to point out, was discoverability, and Derek mentioned that a little bit too, but, there's kind of two ways people find OTT. You have your in-market, loyal brand users that are gonna come find you because they recognize your call letters and they want to consume your content. But OTT is a national channel all of a sudden. So now you're marketing to people outside of your market. How do those people find you? And they're not going to look through your call letters. I really encourage everybody, if you're looking at naming your broadcast app, just go hop on a Roku platform and go put in Kentucky News and see what pops up. You want to be in that list. So I think we have to understand how keywords and stuff work on OTT platforms, which is much different because you only get 7 of them.
Right.
It's all in the title. So make sure that location's there, make sure what kind of content you're offering is there, and stick the call letters in too, sure,
Sure.
because some people are going to follow you, but that name is so important. Yeah.
It's kind of weird because your legacy broadcasters think in terms of what their broadcast tower and what their coverage area is. And now, instead of a city or, a couple cities, you're thinking of the whole state. And we've even done an OTT app with newspaper Madison. And they're not thinking just the city of Madison, they're thinking the whole state of Wisconsin.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you talked about revenue a little bit earlier. That's sort of the fundamental question, right? How can we make money from OTT? What are the business models that you're seeing?
You want to take a whack at that? It's a complicated answer.
Well, I think the previous session actually led into this very, very well. That was kind of an example of a bigger client. When we're looking at local media, which is what we concentrate in, that client side, server side, all that stuff is a huge challenge right now with revenue. So there's still a lot of local media. I'd say most right now, they're still looking at a very traditional type of advertising, which is client side. We have our digital technology, which is pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll. That all works, and in the live linear stream itself, we've seen a lot of creativity, and Derek can do this. We have clients that are actually using a wide orbit system, and they're just trafficking their own linear channel differently from their on-air broadcast, and they're like, we can do it that way while the industry figures this out.
Right.
One of the challenges with revenue is that during the opening presentation with Hulu, he mentioned this, is that we don't have a industry-wide adoption of digital live streaming for markers, right? So, and if you don't believe me, go talk to a broadcast engineer and ask them what they think about SCUDdy markers,
Right.
So to really achieve the DAI that everybody's kind of expecting, we've got to figure that out. So, and we will, the industry will get there, but right now, those client side sponsorship models, when you first launch your OTT channel, you don't have an audience, right? If it's brand new, you need to be able to make money on it right away. So kind of that two-tier process. What is my out-of-the-gate revenue plan? which may be very TV-like, bundled
Right.
products with sponsorships and stuff, and then how am I going to monetize this as my audience grows?
Right. And so there's a point when you're able to evaluate, okay, now that we've started off and we've built up the audience, can we switch it to pulling in other networks? Can you sell on a CPM basis at that point? That's the big jumping point.
Mhm.
And a lot of local stations still are, the traffic size can't justify that yet. But with server-side ad insertion, that starts to increase their inventory on a live stream.
Mhm.
And you're not just talking about one pre-roll now. Now you're
Right.
talking about, how many of them can you get in the middle of an entire stream? Can you string all of your VOD clips together and then run ads in between those? So that's been opening up the market. But yeah, there's some technical side of things. Yeah, and there's a lot of smart people figuring out how to do that. But at the local side, a lot of the trigger mechanisms are still a basic switch that's on, off.
Mhm.
And it's a GPIO, and you can fake it, but eventually with the SCUDdy markers, there's a lot of additional metadata that you
Right.
can tell about, okay, we're going to a commercial and it's 2 minutes long.
Mhm.
Just knowing the length of it would be really helpful
Right.
ahead of time. But it's hit or miss, and it's an upgrade for every station to
Mhm.
get up to that system. Not everybody has that right away.
Right. You talked earlier about the newspaper in Madison that you're working with and how they've gone statewide. What are some other innovative or unusual things that you've seen your customers do or helped your customers do to make their OTT channels stand out and to reach new audiences?
Well, I mean, I think you mentioned one right there, which is a great example, is a publishing company, embracing video world.
Mhm.
They decided to invest in the infrastructure. Publishing company, unlike a broadcast company, has zero infrastructure really, right, as far as, video management systems and stuff. So
Mhm.
they really have to start from the ground up. So it's very interesting. They built a video team,
Mhm.
and their video teams on the publishing side of things tend to be very app-centric, right? Because they don't have a broadcast to worry about, right?
Right.
So those things like niche OTT content is all they do, So their channels are very interesting to watch. So that's a good one to watch. I mentioned, on the monetization piece, WWSB, who's located in Sarasota. When I mentioned a pioneer, they were actually one of the first local media apps that were launched on Roku and Amazon. They've been around for a while. And launched, they had kind of a division of market thing with Tampa happening. So they were just like, let's throw it on OTT and see what happens. But they didn't have any way to get those commercials and that linear stream when they did their newscast. So using that legacy system to making money work, they just worked really hard at making money at it. So I think that was a really good example. And some other kind of unusual things stand out.
Podcasting.
Yeah.
Podcasting on OTT is a unique thing that we've seen in several markets, and especially it helps alleviate some of the production concerns. So if you're already producing podcasts for whatever online, you can repurpose it for OTT, hit play, listen. It gives you some advertising abilities as well, with the traditional pre and post roll and all that.
Right.
Yeah, I think that one I've seen to be. I would like to see more of it.
Right, and it keeps people in the app when
Right.
they're not necessarily, they're not necessarily in a situation where they want to watch video, but it keeps them in the app, it keeps them identified with and relating to the brand, again, without the distractions, because
Well,
sometimes video could be a distraction.
Yeah, and
Right.
I think one cool thing is that, things like Apple Music, Pandora,
Mhm.
things like that, it trained us to listen to our TVs instead of watch them.
Right.
The whole audio, with Alexa and all these other smart devices in the house, people are used to walking around and listening. So I think it's a great opportunities, and it also gives radio a great opportunity too. There's a thing called Listen Live, people would want to hear that music. So I think it opens up a lot of doors.
And I think the other thing that we're starting to see is content licensing.
Yeah.
So we've seen some cases where on TV, on local TV, they're bringing in syndicated content all the
Right.
time. But to do it on OTT is kind of a new concept, and it doesn't mean that you're going, and you don't want to bring in Judge Judy
Right.
onto OTT, because she's got her own thing.
Right,
Well,
right.
why do you want to see that? But we've seen several independent producers that are either creating content, and they're seeing OTT as a new channel to distribute their content on, and not just to repeat what's on television, but to actually give a unique angle to it. And then the challenge is to the broadcaster, to the local company, is to, well, how do we fit this into our, it's different than all the rest of the content. And but at that point, they have an opportunity to build a model around that type of content too. Right now, they're just thinking about their own content, but we're starting to see a lot of that with Newsy.
Right.
Newsy's showing up on OTT, and it's done wonders for them.
Yeah.
And Cheddar's building out their own brand, but they're it's that kind of thing where you're only seeing it on digital and nowhere else. And that's going to be really, I think that's a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And more traditional broadcasters need to embrace that so as not to be seen as, I mean, as the channel the old people watch, right?
Right, yeah.
Like Melissa said this morning.
Yeah, I think some other really great standouts actually have to do with content. I think, we talked a little bit about, how people find your product on OTT. You have your internal market and then your external users that will look for you. Well, let's say I'm in Mississippi, that's where I'm from.
Okay.
If you can't tell by my
Right.
accent. And I'm traveling to New York, I might look for New York news, but it'd be really awesome if the local affiliate also provided me with things to do while I was here. That opens up a lot of sales content that is actually presented as user content,
Right.
right? It's a really great opportunity. We have a lot of clients trying that model out. It takes the technology out of revenue, too. You do what you do, and that's produce content, produce it well, you get paid for it.
Right.
And then you're presenting the user's information that they can use. So I think that's been a very interesting kind of case studies to follow.
Before we take questions from the audience, let's sort of look to the future a little bit. What do you see are the biggest changes coming, the biggest opportunities, and maybe some of the biggest challenges or roadblocks that people might face?
Well, there was a little bit of a touched on earlier where we're talking about tracking. There are things that we would like to do with our apps that have to do with users logging in, being able to actually log into a sponsored app and being able to give them content recommendations so that they can actually, so we know who we're talking to. And I know that from the video side, there is a way to know who the customers are. At companies like ours that know more about just a user on OTT, we know about users on the website, mobile, OTT, multiple platforms. That's one thing that we are interested in. And it also helps avoid maybe a curveball coming our way with some of the ad blocking that's coming on. So what Apple is doing and some of the other platforms, it's going to make it more important to have people. One of the best ways to track somebody is to have them log in
Right.
to see something. And so I think that's what we're going to see down the road. That's the first thing, I think. There's probably more.
I think, inventory is a sore spot right now. Local media, it's easy to talk about technology when we're talking about big companies that have like a lot of inventory. And we have groups of local broadcasters that have a lot of local properties underneath them where their inventory can be considered as a whole. But when you have independent stations, independent publishers, and it's just their video, they're not considered for any of the stuff that we're talking about. Like DAI from Google, their inventory is not considered.
Right.
So I think we really have the challenge is to grow that inventory, to get more discovery on the platform so they can be considered and to continue that conversation with the Googles.
Sure.
To make sure that, that we get, prime spotlight in some of that inventory as well. So I think that's a huge challenge. I think we've hit on, a lot of this, the monetization, kind of my soapbox with, local media companies right now is we're all waiting for the programmatic to be our business model. I think we fell into that trap with mobile apps as well, and I think we should definitely learn our lessons from there as local media companies, and know that direct sales still work. We have those relationships, and, you know, not to depend on
Right.
anything other than hard work, right? I
Sure.
think that's okay right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the other thing we're going to continue to see, as far as what we're seeing, is more work around those Scuddy markers we were talking about. So, you know, in the next year or two, you know, so that will continue to evolve. It will continue to actually become standardized. That's kind of, I'm actually looking forward to that.
Right.
It won't be such a difficult hurdle to get over.
Right, and it seems like, you know, within OTT and within streaming media, there's been a resistance to standardization of any kind. It's seen as kind of, it used to be seen as kind of a dirty word, but now people are realizing that for the real growth that we want to see and need to see happen, there needs to be some level of standardization on things like Scuddy markers.
Right, right. And I think the other thing that so I was having a conversation with someone that's more on the digital side, and I was trying to explain what ATSC 3.0 is. And this, what's that?
Right.
So that's such a foreign concept to someone who doesn't know much about broadcasting, but ATSC 3.0 is, you know, I'm curious to see what that's going to do and how that impacts OTT for local broadcast news in the future, because I mean, it requires you to get a new TV set and a whole bunch of stuff, so it's far off yet, but you know, it will be delivering higher quality video over the air, but an interactive component that makes it similar to OTT.
Right.
And I don't have the answer. I don't know what's going to happen. It's just something that I'm watching, and
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see how that's all going to play out in the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. In Streaming Media Magazine, Tim Siglin wrote an in-depth feature explanation of ATSC 3.0 in the January-February issue, I believe, and that's up on the website if you want to learn more about ATSC 3.0. And I can guarantee that we didn't have a session here on ATSC until we had an opening, and then we knew that we needed to get something in here about it. There will definitely be sessions at Streaming Media West about ATSC 3.0. Any questions from the audience for Derek and Susan? Nadine?
So you talked about server-side ad insertion, which incidentally is an external option. Are you finding that that's actually helping you really monetize your business, or are you still finding that you're using a lot of custom development to support client-side advertising?
So as far as a technical hurdle, we're still dealing with the technical challenges. From what we've seen on our side is that the customers that we're working with in local broadcast are still able to sell, and that isn't a challenge yet to them. It's just, we need to separate the technical challenges from the ability to sell. And selling locally into their own market and knowing the marketplace and being able to sell basically a second digital channel is something that they have the skill set to already do. It is a bit of a manpower thing. You know, they have to sell twice as much. But I don't think it's limiting anybody. I just think that once those technical hurdles have been solved, it gives them more options to mix in with what they're already doing on what they've been doing for the last 50 years. I don't know. Is that a good summary?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, a question. How do you, when you do targeted ad insertion, are you still selling in a local context, or are you aggregating many stations, avails into more of a national targeted? And then what sorts, if you are doing targeted, what sorts of targeting parameters do you use?
Right, so targeting advertising on OTT is a very manual process right now, especially when we're talking about pre-roll and stuff, because it's, we're commonly using that DFP. We're kind of having to manually target content. I'd say we're not quite up to par with targeting audience yet. And the other thing, what was the first part of your question?
Are you aggregating impressions up to go OTT is still local?
I'd say 90% of what everybody's doing right now with our customer base, which is a good example of what's going on across the US, is it's local. You know, we're not, I think people are really waiting for that programmatic to be figured out and depending on that for that national.
All right, well, we're out of time, so thanks so much.
Thank you.
Eric.